Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate how many speakers you're hearing today. But there's a lot to talk about regarding national popular vote. And what I'd like to go through today is basically 4 parts. Did you hear? There we go. What I'd like to do today is basically do 4 parts to this presentation. The first part is going to update you where we are with the referendum. The second part is just to go through, because it's always good to hear this, a summary of what national popular vote does and how it works, because people still get confused. Then third, go through some of the common arguments that you're going to hear and kind of immediate responses to them, because we're already seeing how they're framing the opposition that we're having. And then the fourth part is to take questions. So in terms of where we are on the referendum, as you know, it's going to be on the ballot in 2020, not 2019, 2020. And the question will be, should we affirm what the legislature did in adopting Colorado as part of the National Popular Vote Compact? And when you hear compact, that's simply just a contract. And it's a contract that says for states that have passed it, we passed it in over 16 jurisdictions, lead compacting states say that when we have enough states equaling 270 electors or more, and only then, when the compact is triggered, and that group of states will award their electors in a block for whoever wins the national popular vote of all 50 states and the District of Columbia. The basic principle, and the principle you should end every argument is, every vote in every state should count, and whoever gets the most votes should win. In terms of the campaign, we're in the process of hiring a general consultant. We'll have that done probably in the next 2 weeks. This will be probably one of the most controversial ballot issues on the ballot in 2020. So far, the opposition has been almost exclusively Republican. It's a lot of Cory Gardner support. It looks like that they're using this as a base driver for Republican voters for Cory because they're really worried about him. We have an extraordinary grassroots effort and volunteer effort. Sylvia, who's in the back of the room, has been just a rock star that has made this happen. We have a team now of, including our national team, of probably 16 people that are part of this campaign, and we're going to win this campaign. It is very winnable, but it's going to take a lot of work because it's an issue that a lot of people don't understand. Now, let's go back and think about the compact and how it works and why you don't need a constitutional amendment. So when you look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2 says, and I'm going to read it, I always have to bring the paper because I can't seem to memorize it. Each state shall appoint in a manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. This has been interpreted by the United States Supreme Court twice, in 1898 and Bush v. Gore. And in both cases, it said the states have what is known as exclusive, that word came from the 1898 decision, and plenary, that came from Bush v. Gore, authority to determine how their electors are awarded. The only limitation is it can't be members of Congress. That's it. You can pick any method you want. And so North Carolina's had over 6 or 7 different methods. I think Massachusetts is on its 13th. We've tried all kinds of methods, but what happened is we now are in a state of where the winner-take-all rule, and it's just a rule. Keep in mind that the winner-take-all rule is not in the Constitution, was never discussed at the Constitutional Convention, and is not in the Federalist Papers. This is something that came about in the second presidential election. So what happened when John Adams was running against Thomas Jefferson? Virginia didn't use winner-take-all, and the Carolinas didn't use winner-take-all, and Jefferson lost to Adams by 1 vote. He quickly wrote his friend, James Madison, who's in the Virginia legislature, saying, oh my God, what are we doing? He literally used the word silly. James Madison went to the legislature, and guess what? They went to winner-take-all. By the 1850s, almost every state was using winner-take-all. And because it makes sense. If you don't use winner-take-all, you're essentially giving away half of your electors because you want them to go as a block. So today we have 48 states that are winner-take-all, 2 states that are congressional district. So what this proposal does is we enter into a compact, and the rule is different. The winner-take-all rule goes away, the state-based one, and the entering the compact and awarding electors to whoever wins the all 50 state plus DC vote goes to, that's who the president's going to be. Now, kinds of arguments that you're going to hear. First one you're going to hear, oh my gosh, Ted, then it's possible that our electors are going to get awarded to somebody who didn't win our state. So I'll give an example of this last election. Let's assume so Hillary won, and the compact was in place. Well, let's say Trump won, the compact was in place, and Hillary won the popular vote. You could have a situation where your state votes one way, your electors have to go the other way, because that's who wins the national popular vote. And people complain about that, and so the argument is, well, then we're giving away our electors to California and to New York. I'm going to address that issue second. The first one is, we're not electing the president of Colorado. We're electing the president of the United States. All 50 states plus the District of Columbia. The second argument you make is, well, you know, the people that are on the no side, this is how much their vote is worth. 0, nada, nothing. They might as well not vote for president, because it's whoever wins 50 plus 1, that's where the electors go. The third argument you make, and I'm a big advocate for every time you argue with someone, get a response, you end with, it's a basic principle. Every vote in every state should count in every presidential election, and whoever gets the most votes should be the winner. Next argument you get, well, then big cities are going to control this. My God, there are so many people in LA, and San Francisco, New York City, little old Colorado, we're just going to be left behind. Keep in mind, first of all, one, if the numbers actually added up, then it would be a problem. But you take the top 10 cities, they represent only 8% of the population. 8. You take the top 50 cities, 50, and the 50th city, by the way, is Arlington, Texas, which is Arlington, Texas. This 50th state for the largest 50 cities, Arlington, Texas, which is now Metropolis. Those 50 cities represent 15% of the population. It is statistically impossible for cities to control the election. And the other thing you have to think about, cities don't vote one way. You know, there's always going to be 35%, 40%, 45% that's going to vote the other way. So if there's some grand plan to get 100% of the city, I would love to see it. The next question, this comes to big states, rural versus city. Well, rural areas are going to be left behind. Oh my goodness, you know, it's just, this quote, electoral college was meant to protect us. You know, we just, national popular vote, how's that going to be? This is an interesting statistic. 1/6 of the country lives in cities. 1/6 of the country lives in rural areas. They're almost exact amounts. When you take a look historically how they vote, in cities, it's usually roughly 60% Democratic, 30% Republican. When you look at rural areas, it's just a flip. What happens is in the middle. That's the rest of the country. And historically, it's been 50-50, 55-45, because that's where the competitive elections are. So it's, again, impossible. Now, let's just talk about the problems of the current system. The current system, 3/4 of the states, 3/4, get completely ignored. Not a dime, not a visit. Find that the 13 small states, and take New Hampshire out, those 12 states, 6 are Republican, 6 are Democratic. What do they get? Nada, nothing. Because if you're not a battleground state, one that's competitive for the presidential election, there's no reason to spend money there. If you're reliably red or reliably blue, why would you do it? The only president who made the mistake of thinking he can go to every state was Richard Nixon. You know, he spent all that time going to Alaska, and that obviously didn't help him. Always loved that part. So the next thing to think about is those, let's say, 11 states typically get 95% of the visits and the money, 95. Of that, 4 get 2/3 of that. 4. Now, why is this bad? It's bad for 2 reasons. One, it's just unfair. You know, what makes there a battleground state to come about? It's just a matter of demographics, it's a matter of politically what's going on in the state. There isn't some mythical power that's, you know, trying to protect certain parts of the country by saying, okay, well then in this election, we'll do this mix of battleground states. It's purely happenstance. Every vote in every state and every election should count, and whoever gets the most votes should win. The second argument, and this is one I wish would get more play, it distorts policy. You think about the number of Superfund sites that actually help, the number of disaster declarations, where presidents actually go, where money is spent. Let's take Medicare Part D. Medicare Part D was the largest expansion of the entitlement program. It's the largest expansion since we created it. And who adopted it? A completely Republican Congress. Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican President. And why did he do that? Why did Bush do that? Florida. He needed Florida in order to win. Now, we're just as bad on the Democratic side. President Obama, the largest SBA grant that was done was in for a ricotta cheese factory, ricotta cheese. In what state? Ohio. You think about just where the money goes and how it distorts policy. Another example, George Bush did steel tariffs for who? Pennsylvania. When the BP disaster happened, you know, oil is washing up the beaches of Texas, washing up the beaches of Louisiana, washing up the beaches of Mississippi, washing up the beaches of Alabama. The day after, literally, the day after it hit Florida, President Obama was on the beach doing a press conference. This is not fair. We have states that are getting flown over that aren't getting anything. Next question you'll ask is, okay, well, Ted, how do we know this country is big, it's going to take a lot of money to go around, why would you go to some of these areas? And the best way to think about it is let's take an example state of how a campaign is run. Ohio. You can't win Ohio just by going to Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland. It's not possible. Just like here in Colorado, you can't win just by going up and down I-25. There aren't enough votes, given that votes in terms of how they're spread out around the state. In Ohio, every single county got something. Every one. Why? Because there are votes in every one. So the less populous states may not get a presidential visit, but they will at least get part of those huge amount of resources that used to go to a small amount of states. Inherently, the current system is unfair. Now, when you think about arguments against national popular vote, and there were a couple that come up that I want to address now, and then we'll do some questions. People will be like, well, wait a minute, what about recounts? You know, we could get to a place where all these states, you know, are putting up their votes and we could be really, really close and it could be what they call recount, pardon my language, hell. How do we know this wouldn't extend into the next year and then we wouldn't have a president and then, all of the United States would fall apart? If recounts were a problem, they would be more of a problem with the current system today, because we have fewer states. And with fewer states, statistically, it could be higher. And the amount of votes that you need in those states is a lot less. Ergo, Florida. Now, if you take a look at all 50 states in the District of Columbia, the likelihood that you're going to have votes that close, just given margins that you're going to have, for example, margins that you'll have in California, Texas, Kansas, all up through the Midwest, it is statistically less likely than the current system. Next one. This is the one that just drives me nuts. Fraud. There's going to be voter fraud because we Democrats sit around and plan and do conspiracies because we're like what used to happen in Chicago, 15 decades ago. And my first response to people as a Democrat is, if we only had that much time and we were that smart. Yeah, that organized, exactly. But if there's a concern with fraud, we should be more concerned about it under the current system. Why? Fewer number of states. And with more states, you would really have to design a quite elaborate program in order to have fraud. And from a Democrat's perspective, I would just say, why put all that effort into get out the vote? Because in the end, every vote in every state, in every election should count, and whoever wins the most votes should be president of the United States. So I think it'd be better to take questions, because this is the best way to learn this. We typically don't take this much time, but I think it's smart to ask me anything. Trust me, I've heard it all. I've been doing this since 2006. This effort started in 2004. This is a labor of love.
There was a recent court decision, I don't remember what level the decision was, that basically said the electors can vote for whoever they want, which puts the presidential election in the hands of 538 people. How would we counteract that problem?
Right. So what she's talking about is something called faithless electors. Because the way the Founding Fathers set this up, and let's keep in mind, when the Founding Fathers set up the Electoral College, they weren't talking about the winner-take-all rule. What they were doing that September 4th, in that hot September, 77, they created, because they couldn't decide on how the president was going to be elected, they had vote after vote after vote after vote, and you could never get a majority. They said, well, let's model it after the College of Cardinals. And I know. Hey, listen to the gay rights advocate. I don't like the church. That's a topic we could talk about a long time. It's called statute of limitations. So the idea being that states would use whatever method they wanted in order to elect wise men who would get together in December after the election in November, and they would ultimately decide who was going to be president, how their state was going to vote. Because it's interesting, there's nothing in the Constitution that gives any of us a right to vote. Nothing. The reason why you had a right to vote is because there's state statutes saying you can't. The thought was, this would be the entity, College of Cardinals for elections, that would control the masses, make sure we make the right decision. Well, because of the development of the winner-take-all rule, and it's in all the states, they don't do that. It's whoever gets the most votes in that state, those are electors that show up. So let me go through the electors process and how that works, and yes, I'm going to get to your question. Electors are chosen, for example, in Colorado, at the state convention. So the Republican State Convention selects a slate of electors, usually former electeds, their wives. The Democratic Convention does the same. You know, I think Wellington Webb has been elected forever. When whoever wins that state, that's the slate of electors that shows up in December. So if it's the Democrats show up. If it's the Republican shows up. Now, in most states, they still can vote any way they want. Now, obviously, they're chosen by their state conventions. They vet them pretty well, knowing they're going to vote the way that people voted. Out of, I'm trying to remember, Sylvia, is it 20,000 or 11,000 electoral votes has been cast? I can't remember, it's one of the two. You know how many electors didn't vote the way they were supposed to? Actually, it's 17 now. The chances of that happening are really rare. If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. I mean, think of the controversial elections that we had. It's, again, almost statistically impossible for it to happen in enough states in order to throw an election. So the 10th Circuit decision, this is one area where our opponents and us agree. And that is, it really doesn't mean much because of how the current system works and how the electors are vetted. The likelihood, particularly given historically, only 17 out of 11,000 or 20,000 electoral votes cast. It's super, super low. I mean, they couldn't even get them to do it with Trump. You know, and there were a number of no-Trump Republicans. And if you can't get it in that environment, how else are you going to get it?
Chief President, if this goes through.
It's closer. It's on, it's closer.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. If this goes through, how will the slate of electors from each state be chosen? Because it wouldn't be one party any better.
Same way, it's not affected. So what would happen is the slate of electors that would show up would be based on whoever wins the all 50 state and District of Columbia vote. So whoever wins the popular vote, that's the slate that would show up. So, and it is entirely possible that if one candidate wins the popular vote and the other candidate wins Colorado's vote, and it would mean whoever the slate is for the winning candidate, that's the slate that shows up.
Colorado is 1/3 independent. Okay. And you knew that Colorado is
Oh, yeah.
1/3 independent. I would think that the independents would be all over this because that would mean their vote would count even more. But you keep talking about Democrats and Republicans. Where do the independents fall into this equation?
Well, first off, in order for an independent to vote for an independent, there would have to be an independent on the ballot. And in order to get a third-party candidate on the ballot, particularly an independent that could theoretically win, it's really, really difficult because the way the state parties across the country control how you get on the ballot. You know, Ross Perot found that out. Michael Bloomberg's looked at it a number of times. Howard Schultz found that out. The attraction for an unaffiliated voter or independent voter is their vote gets counted. You know, in the current system, again, under the winner-take-all rule, the boogeyman here is not the electoral college. The electoral college is just the trigger for whatever rule is going to be applied. That means every vote's counted. If they vote for the losing candidate, they might as well not have voted because it doesn't go to the total under the current system. Under our system, every vote and every election in every state ensures that whoever gets the most votes wins the presidency. There has to be more.
Question. Even the Electoral College doesn't really accurately reflect the distribution of the population. For instance, California has 65 million people, and it has, only 25 legislators?
You hear it?
Yeah. California has 55 million people in its state. I think it's close to that. And compared to a state like North Dakota, North Dakota has two senators, has two representatives and two senators, I think, one representative, two senators. And but California has two senators, so it's on parity, if you will, with North Dakota for that. But with the number of representatives, it has, I don't think it has, if you were using a ratio of 1 person per million, that would be 55 representatives that it would have. And I don't think it has that many anywhere near that. And the question I'm asking is, has the Electoral College tried to keep the ratio of the population in their state equal to 1 representative, whether it's North Dakota or California?
Right. What you're conflating is the protection of small states and how states are protected today, small states, is the fact that they get 2 senators.
Right.
If the Electoral College is protecting small states, then why in presidential elections do these small states get nothing? 0. No visits, no money, no attention, issues that they care about, unless those issues are cared about in Iowa, in this election, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. They don't mean anything. For the protection of the small states in terms of voting, that's the 2 senators. And that was part of the grand compromise at the convention that happened around July 7th. So keep in mind, the Electoral College was created September 4th. It was not part of the grand compromise.
Yeah.
That's when they created
So the
equal
Electoral
representation in 2 senators.
You're saying the Electoral College, its own rules aren't consistent at all?
Well, no, it is actually 48 states have winner-take-all rule. Because in Article 1, Section 2, it says states have exclusive and plenary authority to determine how their electors are chosen. And most states now do winner-take-all rule, all but 2. So there's this myth, and it's in part because it was created, the idea of an electoral college was created, it was going to be a college of cardinals that everything actually deliberate. And they could vote differently than how their state voted. Because how those electors could be chosen is exclusively the right of the state. Once, where the states did winner-take-all rule, you really didn't have a choice but to adopt the rule. And that's been challenged in the Supreme Court, and twice has gone down. So we're in a place where the only likely fix is the National Popular Vote Compact. People will say, well, why wouldn't we do a constitutional amendment? Can you imagine getting 3/4 of the states, the supermajorities? I mean, my grandchildren will be dead. So there has to be more. Ask me anything.
I was thinking about proportional
Right.
representation, and I heard, so if 40% of people go, then 40% are elected. But I was told that in the last election, there would not have been a clear majority, and it would have gone to the House
The
and
House,
Senate.
yeah.
But if we had done it that way, it would not have been clear, and it would have to have gone.
The challenge with, I'm going to go through second. Technically, the problem you're going to have with it, because, well, I'll do it first. Okay, the question is, what about doing it proportionally? So whatever percentage vote you got in the state, that's the number of electors that you get. And then she cited an example that if in the last election it was proportional, it would have been a tie. And it would have gone into the House of Representatives, and they break a tie, and there's 1 vote per state. The first challenge with proportional is how do you divide it up? Do you round up or do you round down? That's 1. 2, it only works if you assume it's a good idea if everybody does it. Let's say 2 states do proportional. Well, they just gave away half of their electors. And if someone can explain to me how all the states can do this at once, I would love to see how that's done. I mean, it's just another option that just doesn't work.
What do you think about superdelegates?
What do I think about superdelegates? So it's important to remember that what we're proposing is only around the general election. It doesn't affect the primary election. Primaries will operate just like they operate today. But I will answer your question, since I do politics. This is my prediction. I think we're going to have a brokered convention on the Democratic side. The first vote very likely could go to somebody like Elizabeth Warren, but she doesn't get enough. Superdelegates then get a vote. They can't vote first round, they can vote second round. Joe Biden wins, and wins decisively. You can only imagine the cat fight we're going to have in our party. It's going to be big. I hope I'm wrong. Lord, I hope I'm wrong. But that's what I think about superdelegates.